about Caleb? You were talking about raising your kids, and your kid has a belief in God. Does he believe in Santa Claus?
I think so. I don't know. He's kind of on and off with these sort of things. He's 5. I think if I were to ask him right now, my hunch is he would probably believe, but I'm not sure. I honestly don't know.
Okay. What about you, Sonny?
I don't really press that.
So
did your kids ever believe in like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, that sort of thing?
They never believed. We did do Santa Claus, but they would always. I wasn't ever really good at it. So they would say that's mommy's handwriting. They always did. So it was more. It was more just like a funny thing. I mean, it was never anything we took seriously. Mm-hmm. I wish that I hadn't done that, though, to be honest with you. Looking back, I wish that I would have only true things that are real. Because I think that can be confusing. My kids just happen to, talk amongst themselves. And, of course, then the older ones would tell the younger ones, and in a way. But I wish that we hadn't even gone that way. It was a bit, but still.
My perspective on this, Laura, is that Santa Claus and God are basically the same thing. The main differences between them is when kids get to a certain age, we tell them there's no Santa Claus, or they figure out that we don't really believe in Santa Claus, so they stop believing in it. Whereas God, most adults, at least in this country, are still believing in it. And so there's no incentive to ever stop believing in whatever religion. So I don't know, that's my take on it. But what about you?
So yeah, I fully agree with what you have to say. I feel bad for the oldest ones because we did with our exes raise them with the Santa Claus belief. Mine was really young when we broke up. And my husband's were too. They were all under kindergarten age. When we got together was before our oldest boys were even in kindergarten. So they had a few years of believing in Santa Claus, and then we got to be the really, really bad parents that killed Santa Claus. It's kind of like it's like the ongoing joke between my husband and his ex are on good terms, and so it's a kind of an ongoing joke between my husband and his ex and my husband and his mom. Like, oh, you're the ones that killed Santa Claus for the older kids, right? But we never raised our own kids. Like when we had the twins, we never raised them with the Santa Claus belief. And even when we told, I don't know how it went for his kids, but for my son, when we told my son, like, yeah, Santa Claus isn't real, blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh yeah, I knew that. Mm-hmm. Right. He wasn't really surprised. And it didn't really hurt his feelings or anything like that. So yeah, I agree with you. If something's not true, it may seem really, really benign to go ahead and just roll with it as something being fun or like cultural or, but I think it's really kind of bad to teach kids to believe something that's not real and then to turn around and tell them, oh, just kidding.
Well, let me ask you guys this question, because this is another question that was in the chat, and it had to do with this idea of the soul. And I think I can broaden this to this: how do we cope with death? How do you teach children, if there's bad things that happen in the world, sometimes people die, with people who grew up religious, there's an afterlife. And, a common thing is, grandpa's in heaven now, or so-and-so is with the angels, or, I hear all of this sort of talk from religious people, and I didn't think much about it when I was growing up in that. But now when I'm looking back, I don't have kids, but I would never think to tell children that, because I think that gives them false hope. But
you can't avoid it. If they watch Scooby-Doo, they're now inundated with this idea that maybe ghosts might be a possibility. And so therefore the afterlife might be a possibility. Like the afterlife as a concept is so ingrained in our culture. It's inescapable. And
you said that a minute ago, Caleb, and I didn't really think about it until you just used that example, just how ingrained these religious ideas are in pop culture and television, everything that we consume from birth to the end. You're right. It is there. You can't not have an idea. Even if no one ever taught you that,
Because my wife and I never did. My wife and I have never once taught him that he's going to die and become a ghost or an angel or whatever the case might be, or go to heaven or hell. But he comes at us, and there are a handful of things. Like, he'll occasionally come at me with this ghost thing. I think he thinks that ghosts are real. I think that he thinks that gods are real, or God rather. No, not gods per se. And I think that that's because, like I said, it's there. It's intertwined into our entertainment, into all the things that we consume, and it's so. It seems like it's hard to recognize because we're so used to it. But it's if you don't take it for granted and recognize it for what it is, then you can see that pretty much everything has all of this sort of religious baggage associated with it. Things like the afterlife, almost everything that we watch has something like that tied into it, or read, or what have you.
So let me ask you then. Let me go to Sunny for a moment. When you were raising your kids, invariably you're going to have to explain death at some point, I imagine. I mean, you've had 5 kids, so even if 4 of them didn't, I'm assuming one of them did. How do you explain that, and what type of coping tools do you give them to deal with that at a young age if they question it?
So we have had to have these discussions at various times. And I absolutely agree that our culture is completely inundated with images and, this feeling that the afterlife is a real thing. Like I said, I've always been very honest with my kids. So even from a younger age, I would talk to them about, okay, so if you think that grandma went to heaven, what does that mean to you? What are you meaning? And we would really dive into it a little bit. And then after a while, they would say, well, what do you think? And I would say, well, I don't believe that. They're all older now. I'm like, my youngest are 15. Mm-hmm. And my dad died. It'll be 2 years in August. And he sat everybody down, even the grandkids, and said, I don't believe that there's anything after this life. I've had a good life. And
yeah, you told me this. You told me the story on the other show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead and say it again. Yeah.
It was he basically said, I will be living on in your memories and in your heart, and that's the best that we can do. And we were all with him, all the grandkids and everyone was with him when he passed, and it was a beautiful experience. It was a beautiful experience for the kids. They were able to see for themselves that life is finite. It's a precious gift. And I feel, just with the discussions that we've had, that they have actually handled it a lot better than many of our Christian friends and their Christian friends.
Right.
It is completely steeped in reality. There's no false hope given. And I don't know. I feel anyway that it was cathartic, and we were able to enjoy every precious moment that we had with him. Mm-hmm. I think
almost like it gives a sense of closure then, because
it does. I think the hardest part comes if you don't have the ability to say goodbye, if there's a sudden death. Mm-hmm. And you're not able to be with that person. I think that makes it much harder. But I just firmly believe that no matter what the topic is, whether it's death or sex or drugs or anything else, if you're honest with your kids, you have developed with them a sense of trust. And so they'll come to you and they'll talk to you about things in a much more open way than if you have not developed that sense of honesty and trust with them. Right. So that's probably the most important thing.
Laura, I remember when I was a kid watching the movie All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Oh my gosh, that movie scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
Well, I want to hear your take on it, but I remember watching it. The effect it had on me was, for years, I questioned do dogs go to heaven? And I would ask different people who, in my family who believed in the Bible, well, what does the Bible say about dogs? Because I love, I had dogs growing up, and I loved them, and I wanted to see them in heaven too, not just the people. And the answers I got ranged from disappointing to no, heaven is for people. Dogs don't have souls. And then the other ones were, well, of course, dogs go to heaven because they're good. And then another one was nobody really knows because the Bible doesn't talk about that. And I remember feeling very unfulfilled by these answers. And then at some point in my life, it occurred to me that was the wrong question. That the question was, is heaven real? Is there such thing as
Is
heaven?
there a heaven?
Yeah, because they let me believe in this idea for years and years. I'm not angry about that, but I'm just looking back on it. This is again pop culture kind of introducing these ideas. And why would there be a Disney movie called All Dogs Go to Heaven when heaven is not real? And
then why is there a movie called Little Mermaid if mermaids aren't real?
Yeah, but with the Little Mermaid, at least no one believes in mermaids, but you have adults believing and teaching people about heaven, and now you have Disney and all these things.
It definitely reinforces it.
Yeah. So how did you deal with that with raising your kids? Did this ever come up? And if it did, how would you deal with it?
The question about heaven and whether or not there was a heaven?
Yeah, or just dealing with death and, was there an afterlife? This thing about souls, how do you handle that?
So I've had a few different questions. One, it was interesting when my husband's grandma died, because that was when the kids were really, really young. Like the twins don't even really remember his grandma very well, other than a concept or like seeing her in pictures. But they were just developing language. They were maybe like three or so years old. And I remember them coming to me and saying, "Oh, Nom is in heaven. Nom is in heaven." It's like, well, what does that mean, right? And, "Oh, grandma told me Nom is in heaven," right? So they got these concepts from family members that like, I know where she is, right? And at the time I was religious too. I wasn't really pushing the Nom is in heaven thing. I wasn't like having those discussions with them. So I just kind of let it go. It didn't bother me at the time. It did bother me when I left religion though, that they were then given these concepts. And when my grandmother passed away just a few years ago, I asked them what they thought, and they said they didn't know. Like at that point, religion had been something in their past, and it wasn't really something that was on their minds anymore. I don't even think they remembered Nom's death. But the way that we talked about it was in terms of when other people say that grandma is in heaven, that's their belief and it's their way of coping with it, right? And so you guys need to decide what it is that you think or you believe. If it makes you feel comfort to believe that she's in heaven, that's your choice. But you already know mom doesn't believe in a heaven and grandma's gone and stuff. But what brings mom peace, what makes me feel better, is knowing that grandma is not suffering anymore. She's not spending her days in pain, right? So we'd go and visit my grandma, and it was just really hard to be around her and see her getting worse and worse and worse every single time we'd go visit her. And the kids would feel really compassionate and really bad for her. And so being able to have that conversation of, how grandma went from being able to hike with you guys and run around with you guys and play with you guys to just sitting and watching TV with you guys to not even knowing who she's talking to. Like you guys saw the process happen and you guys witnessed her deterioration. So now you guys know that she's not suffering anymore, that she's okay,
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we went with the conversation.